It is Off the Ball Breakfast, and we have a very important book to discuss this morning. It's an archive, it's a museum really. There's lots of good stories, brilliant photographs. It's wonderfully presented and pulled together. It's called Unladylike, A History of Ladies Gaelic Football, and the author, Hayley Kilgallon, is with us this morning. Morning, Hayley, how are you?
Morning, great, thanks.
Thanks
for
a million for coming in. You must be really proud because it's a brilliant production and publication. It's a wonderful book.
Thank you very much. Yeah, delighted with how it turned out. It's the full 50-year history of the LGFA, and we made sure to get lots of great photos in there as well to illustrate, everything over since the 1970s and before up until the present day.
Has something like it been tried before, or because it felt like when I saw it, I was like, oh, this makes sense?
No, yeah, it's the first time a book on the history of ladies Gaelic football has been published. I think it's a long time coming around. When I started my research, there's so many books on the history of Gaelic games and the GAA. When you look to what the history of women's participation in Gaelic games is in those books, it's often just a couple of lines or a paragraph or maybe a chapter. So, delighted to be the first to publish a definitive history.
You're a historian.
I am.
And a Gaelic footballer.
Yes.
So, hey presto.
Yeah.
Match made in heaven, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So I was doing a master's in history about 6 years ago, and we had to go and do a thesis on something, and at the time 15,000 words seemed like an awful lot of words to write, so wanted to pick something I was interested in and realised there wasn't anything out there on ladies Gaelic football, or very little, so I started by just looking at those early years, and now doing a PhD on the subject.
Okay. How long did it take you to pull all this together? Because there's a lot of detail in there.
Yeah, so I guess I started the research when I was doing the master's 6 years ago, and then was out working for a bit, and then came back and started the PhD about 3 years ago. So I guess it took about 2 years then pulling lots of information together, and the hope was that with the LGFA's 50th anniversary this year, I'd have enough to put a book out. It's been about 6 years in the making, kind of on and off.
Was it done with their support, or because there are parts of it that are difficult conversations, I suppose, for the LGFA?
Yeah, I know that the LGFA have been really supportive. They've supported the PhD. They put the funding behind it, and they've been great in terms of helping me look for information, getting in contact with key people, a definitive history of the LGFA. You can't just pick out the golden moment. You have to talk about the difficult times in their history as well.
The title, Hayley, talk to me about the title, because it stands out, and I guess it hints at how ladies football was perceived at its very outset, like a novelty event at carnivals, which I was not aware of whatsoever. Yeah,
so it started in the 1960s, really. That's where it emerged as a carnival act, a novelty act, people coming together to, a bit of entertainment, light entertainment at the weekend, because the idea was that women playing Gaelic football was unladylike. The title came about because it was such a clear theme over and over again in those early years when I was doing the research. When you look at newspaper articles, the reaction to it when it's taking off, and then even with the relationship with the GAA. So when the LGFA are approaching the GAA looking for recognition, one of the reasons the GAA put forward against promoting ladies Gaelic football is because it's unladylike. So the title kind of was a natural one in the end, I think.
Even the name of the sport, I've always quietly and sometimes less quietly had an issue with. Ladies Gaelic football seems very quaint and outdated now.
Yes, yeah. I think it is a product of its time. I haven't found any record of whether there was a discussion over whether it should be ladies Gaelic football or women's Gaelic football. But at the same time, you've other sporting organisations for women setting up, such as the Ladies Football Association of Ireland, which later, becomes part of the FAI. But ladies is the term they used at the time, and they're probably trying to make the idea of women playing Gaelic football quite acceptable. I know in recent years there's been discussion about changing the name. Different counties have pushed motions to Congress, but it hasn't been changed yet. But we've seen in women's soccer that has become Chelsea's women or Liverpool women's clubs. So it's possible that in the future it will change, but I think the ladies is just a product of the 1970s and the culture and society at the time.
We don't call it the Gentlemen's All-Ireland Championship. It's a weird quirk of history. And not to, because it's slightly related, and we will go back after this as well, but the Brendan Martin Cup was another one that kind of struck me last night. Introduced in 74 for the first time, and an Offaly man who was the first treasurer of the LGFA. We do have some powerful women involved in GA. There's Markievicz Park is not a million miles from you. I listen, you don't want to do a disservice to somebody who was involved at the start of the tournament, but equally, wouldn't it be a nice thing to have named it after a woman?
Yeah, I guess so. The reason it's called the Brendan Martin Cup is because he was the first treasurer, and he bought the cup and donated
I'm taking it. I bought it.
Yeah. So, but it is a nice tribute to those who were involved at the beginning as well, and the kind of speaks to the very humble beginnings the LGFA had in terms of they had very little support, very little money, and getting itself off the ground was a success in itself. Who knows in the future? It might be changed. Other cups are called after some of the people who've been involved as well. Like the Intermediate Cup is called after Mary Quinn, who was involved in Ladies Gaelic football in Leitrim. It's possible that you could have future.
The Markovich Cup, I'm starting it now.
Yeah, go for it. Start a campaign. Yeah, in an era before Trump and fake news, there seemed to be a lot of misinformation as well about what impact playing Gaelic football could have on women's body, I guess, from a reproductive sense, but also, you write in the book about the fears that if they were hit in the chest by a ball, it could cause cancer. There was so much misinformation doing the rounds, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. And that really hinders its progress at the beginning. So one fear, as you said, is that if they get hit in the chest with a football, it could cause breast cancer. And Dr. Donald Keenan, who was president of the GAA at the time, he's obviously a medical man. He is worried about this, and he helps the LGFA source sports bras from America in the early 1970s to kind of counter some of these claims and to help ladies Gaelic football become a bit more acceptable. There's no evidence for this, but these kind of medical myths prevail for a long time and make it difficult for them.
The farmer from Cork, obviously, was that because the medical stuff is just nonsense, right? We'll just invent this thing and it'll sort of prove our point. So is it your hypothesis that it was just that greater sort of misogyny in society, and that was, we don't need this, the fellas look after this, and the farmer in Cork gave voice to that, or was that what's your view on that? Yeah,
so that letter from the farmer in Cork, that was one of the first pieces of information I found about ladies Gaelic football or women in Gaelic games. So it's a farmer in Cork, 1967. He writes the Sunday Independent, calling on the GAA to ban women from attending All-Ireland finals in Croke Park because he says they're going to take up valuable space. And he doesn't like the idea of, he calls them pleasure-bent women up in the city, enjoying themselves and going out to take part in entertainment like Gaelic games. I think because of the time, the late 1960s, it shows how maybe people in society would view women's place in society, that they should be at home, they've no place in sport. Sport is for men only, and he says the GAA is for men only. But it's the responses that I find really interesting. So a week later, the Sunday Independent get, maybe 10 responses or so. They print them, and they're all arguing against him. So it shows there's a change in society happening where people are saying, no, women can go and should go. They are part of Gaelic games. They have a role, whether they're washing jerseys or making sandwiches or supporting their husbands or sons or brothers in playing Gaelic games. And it's only because this kind of change in society is happening that the LGFA and Ladies Gaelic football can emerge and take off, and people can say, no, actually, it's not so unladylike. And why shouldn't they have a sport to play as well? Camogie is there, but why shouldn't they be playing Ladies Gaelic football?
Just the phrase in that letter is remarkable. There's nothing more revolting or unnatural, as you said, than to see a pleasure-bent woman up in the city for fun and enjoyment instead of being satisfied with her lot at home. It was the year of that, because the Bunrock and the Heron Constitution that you referenced as well, you can't, 1937, this is 30 years beyond that, and still there's attitudes like this. A woman had flown in space by this point.
Yeah.
In 67, which is crazy.
Yeah, Ireland's society at the time is so conservative.
It's the Catholic Church, I guess. Yeah,
it plays a role as well, and I mentioned in an earlier chapter too about the churches, being uncomfortable with women's athletics and the idea of women being out and being in a public place, being active and sporty as well. So there's fears around women's modesty, and then when it comes to Gaelic games, what are they going to wear? Should they be playing in shorts and that kind of thing? All these are fears, or they're new things that they have to contend with. But then, like I said, the late 1960s, you've got society changing, and then into the 70s, the second wave feminist movement. Although sport is not directly involved in that movement, because of the changes happening in society, sport is now a place where you can also kind of break down the barriers and challenge the status quo in a way.
Well, I'm glad by 2024 we've stopped being obsessed by what women are wearing in our Gaelic sports. At least that's something we've definitely moved on from. Up to 73 then, so this is when like counties start to get organised a little bit, and there is a final that year, but it's not considered the All-Ireland final or first official.
Yeah, it's an unofficial All-Ireland final. Like the LGFA do recognise it in a sense, but it's labelled an All-Ireland final because there is no national organising body for the LGFA, and it's played between Offaly and Kerry in O'Connor Park in Tullamore. It gets a huge or like a decent amount of press coverage at the time to promote it. It's supported by the Offaly County Board as well, which is significant. So you can see there's like organising bodies wanting to support the game because, as we mentioned, like the carnival games have already kind of started and they've progressed beyond kind of novelty acts into competitive games. And you have about 2,000 people at that final in O'Connor Park, and that it's seen then as like, well, we really have to move forward with this. There should be something done. An organising body should be set up. And about 12 months later, then you do have the founding of the LGFA.
Looking at a lot of the photographs and the names of the teams and stuff, even on that Kerry team of 73, there was Ní Garrels in it. 5 Nishoigas featured that day from the Gaeltacht Gainies as well on it. It's incredible to see that. I'm sure there must be a lineage there to modern day sport.
Yeah, absolutely. And then even in later games as well, they're pointing out like links with, you know, brothers who are playing with county teams, or they've already played hockey or camogie or basketball for different clubs.
That's class. So by 74 then there's a lot more counties playing. Obviously, like you mentioned, the growth in media interest. The LGFA have had their first meeting, and there's a momentum behind the whole thing. How many counties are playing at that stage?
So 8 counties officially become part of the LGFA in that first year. It was kind of like the Midlands and Munster and parts of Connacht. So just 8 counties. In fact, actually, Roscommon end up conceding one of their games. So only about 7 of them really take part. So it's quite small. And even then over the next couple of decades or next couple of years, they only got about a membership of about 2,000 in the early 80s. So it's slow to grow at the beginning. But I think the success is in that it does stick around. It doesn't fade away.
I was interested in the media side of it that you touched on a bit earlier on, and I saw that by the late 70s there was a big push to have had the games televised, and Fred Cogley was the head of RT Sport at that time, and was quizzed as to why this couldn't be a thing that was shown live on TV. So there wasn't enough interest in ladies football to warrant any fantastic response from us, which seems it seems incredible now looking back, but obviously that was the attitude at the time. And TG Cahir obviously come in much later and have played a really pivotal role, haven't they, over the last sort of 25 years or close to it?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think the TG Cahir coming on board is a turning point for ladies Gaelic football, because it gives it much greater visibility, and there's consistent coverage as well of the games. And you mentioned, the late 70s, RT say there's no interest. Even in like the 90s, I think Helen O'Rourke speaks about coming up against kind of opposition in the RT as well, that people would have more interest in watching tiddlywinks than women playing Gaelic football. But TG Cahir's coverage has shown that there is, and it's a really successful partnership for both. TG Cahir's ratings and their viewership increase as well. So it's been absolutely like a huge turning point for the LGFA, and then you see at the same time their membership is increasing, so I think you can draw a link between the two.
When was the first game televised, by the way? Do you know?
1998 is the first final that was televised on RT.
Okay, and that was the final?
It was final.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's amazing, isn't it? So late, like to think, because even it lies in stark contrast to the Camogie Association too. Cause like there's a brilliant photograph here for people who pick up the book, page 7 and 8 of an early Camogie match. 1904, the Camogie Association is formed. There seems to be no real rebuttal or opposition to it, which complete contrast to the women's football. Yeah.
So Camogie is seen as kind of like an acceptable sport. It's kind of an alternative to hockey for Irish women. So it's seen as a national pastime, as an alternative to hockey. So that's kind of why it's seen as acceptable. And also, like you can see in the photo there, they're wearing long skirts, they're wearing blouses. So the issue of modesty is kind of overcome too.
It's amazing, isn't it? And the photographs are so important to it. Like, cause I was chatting to Adrian before the show started, and I was saying, like, as well as being so well researched and written, but it's also and I mean this in the nicest possible way, it's a coffee table book as well. The people can flick through it, come back to it, look at the photographs. Like it's it's not just an in-depth read, but there's other aspects to it, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And when like working with the publisher putting together, we wanted it to have an element of that people could pick it up and flick through the photos. And I got some great photos from past players, as well as more modern photos as well. And I think they give a lovely like insight into that time. Like one of my favourite photos is a team photo, or a photo of some of the Kerry players celebrating in the dressing room of Croke Park in 1986, which is the first time ladies Gaelic football was played in Croke Park. And I don't know, it's lovely, like behind the scenes photo, capturing a moment like this. Is a huge time in history that ladies Gaelic football is in Croke Park for the first time, and you can just see like the joy on their faces. And I think some of the players have spoken about how being in Croke Park, like this was, I think it was 1986, so they've won like 3 or 4 or 5 All-Irelands already in a row, but being in Croke Park adds extra weight to this All-Ireland medal.
Yeah, it definitely feels like an important moment. Talk to us as well, because obviously the Mary McAleese conversations around the amalgamation are ongoing, LGFA, Camogie Association and the GEA. So was that in terms of allowing Croke Park to be opened, was that like a moment for the two organisations, or can you talk to us a little bit about the relationship between the two of those over the years?
Yeah, so like from the beginning, when the LGFA is set up in 74, they want to have a relationship with the GAA, and they reach out to, I think Sean O'Sheacon is the president at the time. They're looking for him to give some recognition, and the GAA. And obviously they have a relationship with the GAA because they're dependent on them for access to pitches and facilities. But it's not until about 76 that some contact is properly established between them. And then the early 80s, a committee is set up to think about how they should like recognise the LGFA or work together. And in 1982, then the GAA do officially recognise the LGFA. So from the beginning, the LGFA want a relationship. The GAA are sceptical, though, of ladies Gaelic football. Mentioned they think it's unladylike. They're also fearful of the impact it might have on Camogie. But they do recognise that it could actually be beneficial to the wider GAA and Gaelic Games community if they have some sort of relationship. So then getting into Croke Park in 1986, that's a huge step forward. It shows that they are working together. And I think the GAA come to realise that it's not a fad, it's not going to fade away, it's here to stay, and they might as well support it in some sense.
Was it was there something else other than that? Because they seem such ridiculous reasons, and I know the passage of time can make fools of us all, but was there a funding bit or a financial bit, or was there something else?
In terms of
why they wouldn't, recognition of an organisation seems like such a simple concept.
Yeah, so in their discussions in the early 80s, they're talking about how would they recognise or what kind of relationship they would have. And then when they give this recognition in 82, it's very much they're recognising it, and they're telling their membership to support ladies Gaelic football in whatever way you can, but they don't want to assume a closer relationship than that.
Okay. The rules are obviously one that are a constant debate, in fairness, across both men's and women's, it must be said. But in the original rule book, I think it was Rule 7 that talked about, was it players, the deliberate body contact be eliminated, so that wouldn't exist, and it's obviously a part of an ongoing narrative. How much have the rules changed, if at all, over the years?
Yeah, so when it's starting up in the early 70s, establishing the rules is really important, because at the carnival games, from county to county, the games might be played a little bit differently. And as the association is growing in that first decade, there are fears that it's too physical, that it's unattractive for people, and that it might put off parents getting their daughters involved. So the rules are kind of adapted a little bit in those early years. They go to their membership looking for feedback as well. And I think in terms of rules, they have been quite innovative and open to feedback. I know at present there's talk about maybe allowing a bit more physicality in the game, because obviously the game has changed as well, and obviously we've seen that you do have to allow them for rule changes over time.
Yeah. Who was Sister Pauline, and why was her story important to this whole story? Yeah,
so Sister Pauline, really interesting story that I hadn't heard about before I started all this research. So in 1977, Roscommon reached the All-Ireland final. They're due to play Cavan, but just before their semi-final, one of their players goes to England to join a convent over there. So ahead of the final then, the Roscommon County Board actually write to her Mother Superior looking for special permission for Sister Pauline to come back and play the All-Ireland final. And there's fantastic letters that go between the Roscommon County Board and her Mother Superior, which are in the book. And she is granted permission. She does come home, and media get wind of this, and it's a huge success then in terms of promoting ladies Gaelic football in 1977. RTE follow her. She's photographed coming off the plane, arriving back, and they credit that with getting quite a large crowd at the final. I think there was over 2,000 people in Hyde Park. But unfortunately, they lose the All-Ireland final, and she goes back to England to continue with her vocation.
Amazing.
Yeah. Turns out if you give an event some media coverage, it's good for the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and here's a novelty, because it's not just women playing Gaelic football, but a nun as well, like a religious woman, which wouldn't have seemed to be like two worlds that would mix at all.
Yeah.
Don't tell Archbishop John Charles McQuaid.
Yeah, it is interesting to read through the book how important, not in the good sense, that religious life in Ireland plays in it, which was not surprising, but it plays a big part.
Yeah, it does, and you can't get away from it, because it is a really influential aspect of Irish society in the 30s, 40s, 50s and 60s, and then it wanes a little bit. So, the story of the emergence of ladies Gaelic football, and then its like progression and its success over recent years, is absolutely linked to society and the changes that have occurred. Like, they reflect on one another.
They do, yeah. Well, it's a brilliant production. It's called Unladylike, A History of Ladies Gaelic Football by Hayley Kilgallon. And we really appreciate you jumping into the studio this morning. Enjoyed it. Thanks a million, Hayley.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Available in all good bookshops. Is that what I'm obliged to say?
As they say, yeah.